What are some of the strategic reasons to ask for a hearing when you've been arrested for a DUI in Georgia instead of opting for the ignition interlock device? So the ignition interlock device is something that's new, and it's an opportunity that drivers before did not have. And it's essentially a way to avoid any hard license suspension as long as you're willing to drive on an ignition interlock permit for a year in Georgia. There are reasons to ask for a hearing, though, instead of opting into the ignition interlock device. One reason is you may not be eligible for the ignition interlock device. So you want to make sure before you go through the effort of installing the device in your vehicle that you will be eligible for the permit. But there are additional and strategic reasons that you might want to request a hearing. First and foremost, a hearing may give you an opportunity to evaluate the evidence and cross-examine the officer before your criminal case comes up. So your attorney may, for strategic reasons, want that opportunity to get your officer on the record testifying about the case. Another reason that I sometimes have clients choose to have a hearing as opposed to opting in for the ignition interlock device is that they don't want to go through the added expense of installing the ignition interlock device, nor do they plan to or want to drive for a year. And so one of the benefits to requesting a hearing is it is a bit of a winner-take-all kind of scenario. You either will win, often because the officer does not show, and if you win, your driving privileges will not be impacted by either a refusal suspension or a suspension, a shorter suspension if you took the test. So the winner-take-all really is very tempting to a lot of drivers who don't want to be burdened with the ignition interlock device. Of course, there's the downside to the winner-take-all because if you lose the hearing, then you're looking at a license suspension of a full year, and that can be very painful for a lot of clients. Finally, one of the final reasons to opt in for a license hearing might be in rare circumstances where you know that you already plan to enter a plea of guilty to a DUI, that somehow you know that there are no other viable avenues for you, and you are willing and ready to enter a plea of guilty, even because you often won't have all the evidence within those 30 days. So sometimes you have to make that decision blind. In those rare instances where you already know that you want to plead guilty to DUI, then requesting a hearing may be a good alternative. The reason being is you still have that benefit of a winner-take-all approach. You may just win free and clear. Or if the officer does show, you will have the opportunity to negotiate with the officer where the officer could decide to withdraw the suspension. And if the officer decides to withdraw the suspension, let's say, in exchange for your promise to plead guilty, and he gets the promise in writing, so you would have to submit that written promise in writing to the court, well, many officers are willing to withdraw the suspension if they know that the case is going to close in a guilty plea to DUI. And so this is a real strategic reason to ask for a hearing because it is a benefit that you can accrue by avoiding the ignition interlock device for a year, keeping your driving privileges mostly unaffected, although you need to watch out because there is a conviction DUI suspension, which for the first lifetime is 120 days. So you will still be looking at that conviction suspension, but you won't have to worry about that pesky refusal suspension if you refused the license or if you refused chemical testing when you were arrested originally, because that year license suspension can be painful and unforgiving. So the winner-take-all is sometimes the best approach depending on the specific circumstances of your case, and also depending on what you know within those first 30 days that will give you the information that you need to make an intelligent choice about whether to opt into the winner-take-all hearing approach or the more sometimes safe alternative, which is the ignition interlock device.